Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It is promptly 1:30, but I just wanted to say hello. Today's online webinar will be Gambling 101, a community conversation on gambling. Just for the sake of time, I will begin getting started. So we are in a webinar format, but please feel free to insert questions or anything at any time. We will kind of keep this going as a conversation, so no need to wait till the end. But my name is Daniela Arias. I am one of the co-chairs for the Stanford Prevention Council, one of the sponsors for today, along with Karina, who is here from Greenwich Together. So we're doing a combined thing. We have some Stanford and Greenwich people, as well as Ingrid Gillespie is here, who is also co-chair of the Stanford Prevention Council. And then our wonderful host, Dina, who is here from Catalyst CT, the hub. She is Region 1's Gambling Awareness Coordinator, and she will be kicking things off. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Daniela, and welcome everybody. And like Daniela said, put any questions you have in the chat box, and then they'll bring them up to me. I prefer this is we can talk together, or I can answer your questions right on the spot, so we don't miss anything. And thank you for coming. And we're going to talk about Gambling 101 today. I talk a little bit about gaming, so hopefully I cover some topics that you're interested in. Thank you for being here. Just some learning objectives to get us started. We will define and identify different types of gambling, talk about the many impacts that gambling has, and how to identify some of those warning signs that you should look out for. And we'll share a whole lot of resources at the end. I encourage you to take a picture of the screen, or if you want the slides afterwards, we can send them out. I can send them to you all. And then this is a good time for some participation from you all. If you want to do in the chat box, I'll open it as well. Don't hit go yet, but type in the chat box what age you think was the first time you experienced something gambling. And when I say go, we'll do a waterfall of those ages. I'm going to participate too. So let's see, what age did you first experience gambling? I'll give everybody a few minutes to put that number in the chat, and then we'll waterfall it in when I say go.
I believe it's the Q&A box. Just the chat is disabled.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, so we're just chatting to each other. Okay. So in Q&A. I don't think I see Q&A anymore. Oh, yes, I do. All right, go ahead. Everybody put it on in there and we can see. We have 13, 8, 14. Thank you all. I was going to put 5 in there. Lots coming in. 13. So it seems like a consensus, a pretty young age. Well, we have 8, so getting younger. Thank you all. So this question I like to ask, and I think is a great question to ask, because it brings awareness to that you all knew already that gambling happens at young ages, but some people put in 21. But gambling can be bingo in kindergarten. That's why I usually say 5, because I think that's how old I was in kindergarten. But that just puts into perspective how much throughout somebody's life you can be exposed to gambling. It can be scratch off tickets in your stocking as a kid, or you can wait till you're 18 to buy a scratch off ticket from the store. And we get into some definitions here before we get into gambling, but gambling can be an addiction. So we like to give some context before talking about it, that gambling or addiction is very complex, and it is a disease that happens in the brain. Addiction is not something someone chooses to do. It's a disease that they had and has some harmful consequences. So, and then another definition, plain and simple, this comes from a dictionary. What is gambling? It's risking something of value on an activity that has an uncertain outcome. It could be anything of value. So to that certain person, whatever is valuable to them. It could be a bag of chips in the lunchroom on whose table is called first, or more traditional, like a poker game with money, or race cars as a kid, or anything of value that you don't know the outcome of. Here's some more definitions on some more things we're going to talk about today. So what is responsible gambling? I am not here to tell people not to gamble. All of the other coordinators in the state level, CCPG, the Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling, we want responsible gambling. So this is the definition for that. A term that describes the ways in which games of chance are both offered, so how they're presented to the community, and participated in a socially responsible way that lowers those risks. And then problem gambling is that next step. So a pattern of gambling engagement that's so extreme that it causes an individual substantial problems. And we'll talk more about those problems, but it could be financial problems, it could be physical problems, or others as well. And then gambling disorder, this is when it's clinical. So different set of criteria are addressed on the DSMV. Sorry, that trips my tongue up every time. But that is done in a clinical setting with questions of that person, and then you are diagnosed with a gambling disorder. And some people are more vulnerable to addiction. We might know that, but we like to give some context on that. So your genetics account for approximately half of that vulnerability. I didn't realize it was so high until I started this work. The social environment you're in, how you were raised in your culture, the different neighborhoods, schools, who you hung out with, your peer groups, and the different lifestyles and brain development, what stage of life you're in, and when you start gambling changes your likelihood to possibly have a gambling addiction. And nobody is the same. So there's always can be a different path to addiction for any addiction, not just gambling. And then your prefrontal cortex is very important. We know that we like to delay the onset of any substance use, and that is the same thing with any kind of gambling or video gaming. The longer we can delay that first big win, that first big dopamine hit, the better off someone will be to not eventually possibly develop an addiction. The same with alcohol, drugs, marijuana, things like that. And talking more about the brain, so if you look at these lists really quick, there are a lot of similarities. So the brain on drugs and the brain on gambling, they both affect the middle part of your brain. It gives you a reward dopamine hit. The more you do, the higher your tolerance will be. So we know when someone is using any kind of substance, your body builds up a tolerance to get that high. But then also gambling, you build up that tolerance, and you need to keep increasing your bets to get that high again. Another one to point out is withdrawal down here. I should highlight that as well. That most people don't know you can withdraw from gambling. You have those same flu-like symptoms when you have an addiction to gambling, and then you start weaning off. You get a headache, mental health issues, vomiting, just like withdrawal from any substance. So now we learn more about gambling in Connecticut, since we have so many different gambling avenues in Connecticut. There's lottery, casino. We have some of the biggest casinos in our state close by, and that raises your chance of having a gambling addiction. We also note here any charitable games, raffles, bingo, a 50-50 raffle. I think back to when I was a swimmer, that we had a 50-50 raffle at every swim meet, and that was a form of gambling. Online gambling now, we all know that is new and upcoming. The stock market and cryptocurrency is also considered gambling. I have another slide on that to give you some more information. And skins and loot boxes in video games. That's where you pay money or put up currency from a video game. Sometimes the box will spin and then it gives you something. So that's a chance that you're taking. And all the ages are listed here, but we all know those aren't always followed. Charitable games, depends on where you go. but usually anybody can participate in a 50-50 raffle or bingo at an establishment. And the impact. So when someone has a gambling problem, this person in the middle, or a gambling addiction, it's called a ripple effect. So every one person working through that gambling addiction, it can affect many people, 7 to 20 people in their families and communities. It could be their immediate family, or if some kind of embezzlement is involved, it could be their workplace, it could be their boss, teachers, if it's students, just depending on what stage of life that person is in and where they are. So it has a big impact, not just on that individual, but the people around them as well. I almost believe that it could be more than the 20 people listed here. And the odds of gambling. We always get kids saying, oh, I'm just so good at it. I can win. I know the game. I know it. But the odds are always against you, and people have probably heard the house always wins, which is very important to know that for kids that the odds are not in your favor. And we put these up here to put light on the odds of things that we think are almost near impossible. So finding a four-leaf clover is 1 in 10,000. You can see getting hit by lightning, shark attack, but then the Powerball. 1 in 292, that's a big number. A lot more zeros than finding a four-leaf clover. We think that's usually hard, but winning Powerball, the odds are difficult. So it's not always a quick win. It's not always a fix. I'm going to get all this money and win. Your odds are low. And since sports betting is such a hot topic right now, these are some definitions to know when sports betting comes up. Money line, these are different bets that people can put on a game. So a money line is betting on, plain and simple, who will win. Oh, I think the Yankees are going to win. This is how much I bet. Or spreads. So betting on who will win the game. I think this team is going to win by 10 points. That 10-point bet would be the spread. Doesn't matter if it's 1 in 10 or 10 in 20, but the spread was 10. And total, over or under. So betting on whether the score will be under or over a certain set of numbers. So I think it'll be over 20 or under 5. And then prop bets, anything within the game. One that people know is at the end of the Super Bowl, the Gatorade's going to be red. People bet on stuff like that all the time. Or how long the national anthem is going to be. Those are different prop bets. And then parlays, betting on a string of picks. So a whole bunch of these things adding together are risky, and things that are the riskiest and lowest, you're winning on a parlay. And then I mentioned before how the stock market can be considered gambling, and how it is a risky behavior depending on how you do it. I put in my certain amount in my 401k once a month. That's not considered risky. But if I was looking at that daily, moving money around, oh, I got to do this. That's considered more risky. So it's how you're doing it. Day trading is also considered risky, and it needs to be known that it is not a quick get rich quick scheme, get rich quick thing, because every day you're moving things back and forth, and it's that unknown outcome that you're putting that money in. And then investing in the market without considerable experience is also considered gambling, because it's risky and unknown, that unknown outcome. So this is where parents are usually very interested, and any teachers or anyone with young people in their life. So the intersection of gaming through technology and how it can relate back to gambling. So e-gaming is that generic term for anything, a game on your phone, a game on the computer, anything on the internet with one or more player. That would be considered e-gaming. And then esports, electronic sports, competitive and professional. And that is where video games have turned into a sports arena. It's turned into a club at schools. Anything video gaming turned into a traditional sport where people compete. And there's also usually a lot of gambling involved in that esports. But they also have clubs at the high school or at school. So we have to remember there are pro-social reasons to have esports leagues for our youth and for adults as well. So here's some more on the intersection of video games and gambling. So this first point here is very important. So out of the 1,600 people were surveyed, and those who said they play video games weekly, they were more likely, 4.3 more times more likely to say they also bet on different things, either if it was in that game or outside. Just having that I game is a higher risk of gambling than those who said they don't. And problem gambling has been found to have statistically a significant association with loot box spending, those loot box that I talked about before. People who have a problem with gambling also spend money on loot boxes. And there's different ways in esports other than loot boxes for some sort of gaming related gambling. So token wagering, some video games have, you can go to the casino and gamble with in-game currency, but then if you run out of in-game currency, you put your real money in there and then you're just gambling. So it's pre-exposing our youth to gambling behaviors that we wouldn't necessarily think were there. So in Connecticut, this gives a little more visual representation of who meets the criteria for gambling disorder. So approximately 65,000 residents and 1.8 of our population. And I think, oh, that doesn't seem like a lot of people, but it's enough to fill Yankee Stadium. And that's a lot of people, I think, if you've ever been there. And then youth face 2 times more of risk of having a gambling disorder. And then athletes also have a 4 times higher risk of having a gambling disorder just because they're youth and just because they're an athlete. And this here is the gambling continuum. Most people fall in this 95% range here, that they can gamble responsibly, that it is okay. They might not gamble at all or socially, but then we creep up to the 3 to 4% and the 1 to 2%, 1% probably have a gambling disorder. And many people fall in this 3 to 4% in Connecticut that are at risk of developing a gambling disorder. So we talked about who might have a gambling disorder, but we want to share what to look out for in someone if you think they might have a gambling problem. So you spend more and more time and more money on gambling. Any social occasion, make it into something that person makes it into something that they could gamble on. The person's intensity of interest gets higher and higher in gambling. You don't hang out with your friends and family anymore. You only share about the wins. Oh, I won this much. I won. But you don't talk about how much you lost to get those winnings. You boast about the winning. You're absent from school and work. You chase those losses. So it is seen as like the solution to your gambling problem is to keep gambling. So you're chasing that loss to get that money back. You don't want to do other things you used to like in other activities and other interests because you just want to keep gambling. The diversions of funds go to other things. Your rent money goes to gambling, or you don't have grocery money this week because you spent it on scratch tickets. You use gambling as your way to cope with things, as your way to escape, and you display and boast about your money and possessions that you have. These are all some warning signs. And then who is at risk for developing that? We talked about signs to look out for, and now this is just the person, what makes them at risk. So someone who has an early big win. That's why we want to not give kids scratch tickets in their stocking at Christmas, because you don't want to predispose them to an early big win. And others, they have access to how they like to gamble. Different beliefs about they think they can beat the game. They don't know that the odds are against them. People who don't take steps to monitor gambling wins and losses. So we encourage people to, if you're going to the casino, go in with a certain amount and know when you lose that you are done. They don't know how much they lost. That's a problem. If you have a recent change in your life, something that disrupted your normal life, you often are bored or lonely, have some sort of other financial problems. Sorry, that's listed twice. Other few interests and hobbies that don't relate to gambling or don't relate to anything else, really. These are people for risk factors. So other people that don't have things going on in their life, they have a higher risk of potentially having a gambling problem. Have a history of mental health problems, particularly depression or anxiety. Studies have shown that people with any kind of mental health problem are predisposed for possibly also having a gambling problem. That's why we always encourage, if somebody goes to some kind of treatment facility, they should also be screened for gambling as well as any kind of mental health problem. If there has been abuse or trauma in their life, somebody or a parent or someone who is close to them has or has had in the past a gambling problem, just like with alcoholism. You have or have had problems with any other type of substance or overspending in general. And then they tie someone's self-esteem to winning. It could be gambling or any other type of big wins or losses that is tied. And the more boxes that a person checks, the higher the likelihood of possibly developing a gambling problem. And then teens. So this is a different list than we've talked about before, but teens who gamble are more likely to do other things. So teens who gamble are more likely to have depression, anxiety, suicide attempts. People with a gambling disorder have the highest rates of suicide attempts than any other substances. And I didn't know that when I started this. So that's also very important to talk about. Teens who gamble have low self-esteem, behavioral issues, negative relationships. They're more likely to use other substances, so more likely to be drinking and using other illegal drugs. Their grades are impacted, more fights might happen. And again, we can move cigarettes up to use other drugs. Since they are underage, that would also be an illegal drug, so they're more likely to smoke cigarettes as well. And like I said before, people with a gambling problem, it's a leading risk factor for suicide. So problem gambling, again, has the highest rate of suicide of any addictive disorder. And then problem gambling and suicide have very similar risk factors and warning signs to look out for. So it's important to know those as well. And important line here at the bottom, if you or anyone you know is in crisis, or a gambling crisis, you can always call 988. That's the Suicide Lifeline, Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. And then also CCPG, Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling. Their helpline there is free 24/7, 365. If you are having some other kind of mental health crisis, The person who picks up on that phone is trained to help through gambling, but they are also trained to get you to those resources for any kind of mental health issue as well. And when you call that line, it's a local Connecticut person. It's someone usually with lived experience or someone with clinical experience. So it's a real human that picks up the phone that's local. And usually they'll follow up. So it's a great option to have. But we'll have more on resources at the end. So some myths and facts to talk about. A lot of people think if people gamble long enough, they'll eventually come out on top. I've heard, okay, I go to this casino. If I sit at the slot for long enough, I'll beat the machine and I'll win. But no, everybody loses. And casinos and any other type of gambling venue, that's why they're so successful, is people keep losing. So you're not going to beat that machine. You're not going to just keep playing until you win. And a fact here, people can become addicted to gambling even if they don't gamble every day. So any type of gambling is a risky behavior. One time, if you get that big win, you could feel withdrawal afterwards and you want to keep going and going just after one win. And this here is a great resource too. I should move that a slide back. I apologize. But this is to promote the 988 Suicide Crisis and Lifeline. This would be a great time to take a picture of this. And if anybody wants more resources on this, we have question, persuade, refer trainings all the time. Message us. We can get you to some kind of resource or just talk with you afterwards. And here is another resource here. I talked about before the Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling, CCPG. This would be a great time. Take that picture, save that phone number in your contacts in your phone. You never know when you might need this. And if you don't feel like calling, you can also text, or you can go on their website and a little chat box comes up and says, what can we help you with? That's when you can jump in that chat box and get some resources. Here's just another list of resources. We're very fortunate in Connecticut to have CCAR programs. They're all about recovery and they're usually peer run. So it's great to have somebody there with lived experience. Again, CCPG, the National Council on Problem Gambling, that's resources across the whole country. And DEMIS, we're lucky and fortunate in Connecticut to have a great structure to support problem gambling services in Connecticut, and that's all through DEMIS. Gam-Anon are groups for family members that are affected by somebody else's problem gambling. GA, Gamblers Anonymous, is like Alcoholics Anonymous for somebody with a gambling issue wanting to quit. Connecticut Gaming and Gambling, excuse me, is a great website with many resources. And then Responsible Play the CT Way. I have Book the Van there. I'll have more pictures there. But Responsible Play the CT Way is a campaign throughout Connecticut that DEMIS, CCPG, and different industry partners partnered together to share responsible ways to gamble and to participate. And we're also very fortunate to have better treatment programs in every region in Connecticut. We're down here in Region 1 in the little, like, it says it looks like Florida of Connecticut, the orange part down there. We're in Region 1, and our Better Choice treatment program is Connecticut Renaissance in Norwalk. And if you call CCPG and you're down here, you will get referred sometimes to Connecticut Renaissance, or you can go directly to them. And there are 16 locations in Connecticut. They're through all different types of, usually community agencies, and they offer many different programs, individual, peer, inpatient, outpatient, and usually at little to no cost to the person needing treatment. And that's all through DEMIS, which I thank them for that all the time. Again, here's that campaign, Responsible Play the CT Way. You can see the partners down there at the bottom. A great campaign that hopefully now that you're aware of it, you'll see it other places. It's at the casinos, it's at a lot of events in our office here and many different offices. But it promotes responsible gambling and taking those steps to reduce the harms for gambling for yourself. And here's some tips. So this comes from the Responsible Play the CT Way campaign. You set a budget and stick to it. Like I said before, you go to the casino with 50 bucks, you know that cash is in your pocket, but you don't go with your credit card that has a high limit. You want to stick to that budget. And you monitor the time you're playing so you're not sitting there for hours and hours on it. And make sure you stand up, take some breaks, and stick to that as well. And gamble for entertainment. Once gambling isn't fun anymore, try to take that step back. It's for a balance of that gaming and life and still just having fun doing it, not having that negative aspect to it. And know how the games work. Again, that the odds are not in your favor. And always, it's okay to ask for help. There are plenty of resources in Connecticut that are free. The Hub's website has a lot of resources. I'll have a link to that at the end. There are plenty of things to help. And voluntary self-exclusion. Let me pull this up here so I can see better. This is where you can self-exclude yourself from any gambling institution in Connecticut. You have to do it for yourself. I can't sign my uncle up who has a gaming problem. He would have to do it for himself, or a gambling problem, excuse me. But it's very important. You could do it for 1 month, 6 months, or lifetime. There's other time frames in there as well. And just same thing, but this is where you would go to it, the connecticut.gov/DMIS/PGS, or CCPG also has a link on their website. Here's the van I talked about a little bit. It's part of the Responsible Play the CT Way campaign, and it brings responsible gambling to you. Not actually gambling, but brings responsible resources for the person to learn anywhere you want. There's TVs, there's resources, there's giveaways, and this can go anywhere. It can go to your office, can go to any event you're having. So we encourage people on the Responsible Play the CT Way to book the van, and it can come out and be at your event. And this is a little shameless plug for our regional gambling awareness teams. I run the regional gambling awareness team for Region 1. Anyone is welcome to join, to network, to gain more resources, to learn more. We meet quarterly. If you're interested, please feel free to send an email, check out our website. Gambling Awareness CT is a state website, and that links to a lot of resources, but also to every RGAT in the state. So if you're not from Region 1 and you want to join Region 3's RGAT, those resources are there for you as well. And then this is where hopefully there's a little participation that to share out if you're able to, if you want to, what is something that you learned or something you will share from this. If you want to do it in the question and answer again, I don't know how to get back there.
You can also feel free to raise your hand if you want to speak.
Oh yeah, that'd be awesome. And if not, that's okay too. This is a big topic and I just threw a lot at you, so feel free to digest a little bit and go from there. Usually when I say what is something you learned, a lot of people will say that stock market and 401ks, they didn't know that that was also gambling, but depending on how you do that. And that's also something people will share out.
Someone said they now know about loot boxes.
Oh, that's
I never
awesome.
thought of loot boxes as gambling.
Yeah.
Also that you can get withdrawal symptoms from quitting gambling.
Yeah, thank you all. Those are great points. I also didn't know about those things until I started learning more about gambling and doing this job. So I thank you for being here and learning those. Um, and loot boxes, most video games, you do have to pay into those for loot boxes, but some of them are not. Some of them are free, and that's just priming that brain for that. Yeah, thank you all for participating. Let's see. Oh, Jonathan, I see your question. How do you think this info lands in sharing directly with high school students? I think that's a great question. I think just having anybody come in to do that is that first step. I find that schools have such a small amount of time that if we come in with a lot of different topics, that's hard. But we want to be accessible to everybody. So that's important. And then also when we did do this for youth, I've only done it one time, but one of my colleagues in another region, she plays Kahoot. She has videos. She brings different games and interactive activities to show that odds are not in your favor. Do a penny flipping heads and tails activity. That they're fun ways to engage those students and then prime them for more conversation on, did you know that heads and tails could be gambling? It's just one example, but it was a great question. Thank you, Jonathan.
Dina, can I just share something about that?
Yeah.
'Cause
Yeah,
we,
go ahead.
so Jonathan, we incorporate gambling when we're talking about prevention for all the reasons that Dina talked about in terms of how it affects dopamine, the reaction. What's interesting when we've talked about gambling, and I know Dina and I and other colleagues have talked about, is the excitement that comes with the kids in the room when you do these gambling activities. So it's always a case of sort of watching, because you don't know, some kids, that's like, wow, excitement. So we always have to certainly temperament, but it's amazing when we do the odds of winning activities and things like that. The excitement just is so heightened whenever we do gambling awareness. So you'll
Yeah.
see a big difference in that. At least that's been my experience over the years.
Yeah, for sure. It's good to like see what kids get so excited about some little simple activity that you might need to talk to a little more or bring a different activity next time. So yeah, that's very important, Ingrid, for sure. I can send this out afterwards, but you could do an evaluation. I think that's it on my end. Just what are your questions and comments? I'll leave this up, and then if anybody has any questions or what else I could touch on, we can always talk more. And I appreciate you all for being here.